The brass handle of Moonlight Cafe felt ice cold against my palm, but nothing could have prepared me for the Arctic freeze that hit my chest when I pushed through that glass door. There, in the corner booth where Blake and I used to share Sunday morning pancakes, sat my boyfriend of 2 years. His fingers were intertwined with someone else's across a table scattered with empty coffee cups and what looked like photo albums. I should have turned around, should have pretended I never saw them, but my feet seemed rooted to the vintage wooden floor as I watched the most beautiful man I'd ever seen lean across the table and brush something off Blake's cheek. Blake didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled, that soft, vulnerable smile I thought belonged only to me. The stranger was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average, confident where I was anxious, effortlessly gorgeous where I had to work for every compliment. His dark hair fell perfectly across his forehead like he'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot. And when he laughed at something Blake said, the sound was rich and warm like expensive wine. I ducked behind the bookshelf near the entrance, hiding between romance novels and self-help books. The irony wasn't lost on me. Through the gap between How to Win at Love and Second Chances, I had a perfect view of my relationship crumbling in real time. Damon, I can't believe you're really here. Blake's voice carried across the quiet cafe and my knees nearly buckled. Damon. The name Blake whispered in his sleep. The ghost who haunted our relationship in fragments of stories that always ended with "but that was a long time ago." Damon reached across the table and took Blake's hand properly now, their fingers fitting together like puzzle pieces. I never should have left for California without fighting for us. These 3 years felt like a lifetime. You had that amazing job opportunity. I understood. No, you didn't understand. You were hurt and I was a coward. Damon's thumb traced circles on Blake's knuckles. The same gesture Blake used to calm me during my anxiety attacks. I thought about you every single day, Blake. Every sunset in Los Angeles, every morning coffee, every song on the radio. You were everywhere, even when you weren't there. Blake's cheeks flushed pink, the same way they did when I first told him I loved him 8 months ago. But this blush was different, deeper, like Damon's words were reaching parts of Blake's heart that I'd never even known existed. I tried to forget you, Blake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I really tried. He stopped himself, but I knew what he was going to say. I even fell in love with someone else. Except now I was wondering if Blake had ever really fallen for me at all, or if I'd just been a convenient distraction from missing Damon. I know about Kai, Damon said gently, and hearing my name in his perfect voice made my stomach clench. Blake, I'm not here to complicate your life. I just needed you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake I've ever made. The way Blake looked at Damon in that moment, like he was staring at the sun after years of living in darkness, told me everything I needed to know. I'd seen Blake happy before, content even, but I'd never seen him look at anything or anyone with such pure, undiluted joy. Not even me. A barista dropped a tray of mugs somewhere behind the counter, the crash of ceramic against tile echoing through the cafe like gunshots. Both Blake and Damon turned toward the sound, and for a terrifying second, I thought Blake might see me lurking behind the books like some pathetic stalker. But he was too focused on Damon to notice anything else. When he turned back to his first love, he was smiling wider than I'd seen in months. God, I missed you, Blake breathed, and those 4 words shattered something inside my chest that I didn't think could break any further. I'd heard enough, seen enough, more than enough to understand that whatever Blake and I had built together was nothing compared to this. We were a comfortable Tuesday evening. Blake and Damon were New Year's Eve fireworks. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped toward the back exit, past the restrooms and through the narrow hallway that led to the alley behind the cafe. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the place could hear it, but I made it to the door without being noticed. The alley smelled like garbage and broken dreams, which felt appropriate. I leaned against the brick wall and tried to catch my breath, tried to process what I'd just witnessed. 2 years of my life, gone. 2 years of believing I was someone's first choice, someone's forever person, evaporated like steam from Blake's coffee cup. I should have stayed, should have walked over to their table and demanded an explanation, should have fought for what was mine. But the truth was, I'd never really been Blake's to begin with. I'd just been borrowing space in his heart while he waited for Damon to come home. The back door of the cafe opened with a creak, and I heard Blake's voice before I saw him. Kai? Kai, what are you doing here? I turned around slowly, like a deer caught in headlights. Blake stood in the doorway, his blonde hair slightly mussed, his blue eyes wide with something between surprise and panic. Behind him I could see Damon watching through the window, his perfect face creased with concern. I started, but my voice cracked like a teenager's. I wanted to surprise you with lunch. Blake's face went white. How long were you there? Long enough to know I never stood a chance. Long enough to realize that every time you said you loved me, you were really missing him. Long enough to understand that I'm just the intermission between the real acts of your life. Long enough, I said instead. Blake stepped toward me, his hand reaching out like he wanted to comfort me, but I backed away. If he touched me now, I'd probably fall apart completely. And I couldn't give him that satisfaction. Couldn't let him see how thoroughly he'd destroyed me with just a look across a cafe table. Kai, please, let me explain. But I was already moving, pushing past him and heading for the mouth of the alley. I needed space, air, distance from the suffocating weight of being someone's consolation prize. Kai, wait! I heard Blake's footsteps behind me as I reached the sidewalk. But I didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. Guess if I looked at his face right now, I might actually forgive him. And I wasn't ready for that kind of self-destruction. So I did what I'd always done when the world became too much to handle. I ran. My sneakers slapped against the concrete in an irregular rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Behind me, Blake's voice grew more desperate with each city block. But I didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. The moment I stopped running, I'd have to face the reality of what I'd just witnessed, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Kai, please, just stop for a second. The downtown evening crowd was thick with office workers heading home and tourists snapping photos of street art. I weaved between them like I was playing some twisted game of human pinball, using their bodies as shields between me and Blake's increasingly frantic calls. A businessman in an expensive suit shot me a dirty look as I brushed past his shoulder, and a group of college students had to jump out of my way as I barreled through their impromptu sidewalk photo shoot. I probably looked insane, running through the city like I was being chased by demons, which, in a way, I was. The demons of insecurity that had been whispering in the back of my mind for months were now screaming at full volume. You knew this day would come. You always knew you weren't enough for someone like Blake. Pretty boys like him don't end up with ordinary guys like you unless they're settling. Kai, please. It's not what you think. Not what I think? I wanted to laugh, but I was breathing too hard to manage more than a bitter wheeze. What exactly was I supposed to think when I walked in on my boyfriend gazing at his ex-lover like he was witnessing the second coming of Christ? The subway entrance appeared ahead of me like a concrete oasis. If I could just make it underground, lose myself in the maze of tunnels and platforms, maybe I could disappear long enough to figure out how to put the pieces of my heart back together. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hands sliding along the grimy metal railing as I descended into the bowels of the city. The familiar smell of urine, hot dogs, and desperation washed over me, oddly comforting in its consistency. At least the subway never pretended to be something it wasn't. The platform was packed with the usual rush hour suspects. Exhausted office workers scrolling through their phones, teenagers with oversized headphones, a busker playing violin near the far wall. I pushed through the crowd, trying to blend in, trying to become invisible. But Blake knew me too well. We'd explored every corner of this city together, hand in hand, planning our future while walking these same streets that now felt like a trap. He knew all my escape routes, all my hiding places. He knew that when I got overwhelmed, I always headed underground. The screech of approaching train wheels echoed through the tunnel, and I felt a surge of hope. If I could just get on that train, put some real distance between us, maybe I could start over somewhere. Blake couldn't find me. Maybe I could rebuild my life without the constant reminder of being someone's second choice. But then I felt that familiar warmth on my shoulder. The same gentle touch that used to calm my panic attacks, that used to make me feel safe and cherished and home. Now it just made me feel sick. Baby, please. Just turn around and look at me. The pet name hit me like a physical blow. How many times had he called Damon baby? 3 years ago. How many times had he whispered sweet nothings in that same voice to the man who actually owned his heart? I turned around slowly, like I was moving through molasses. Blake stood behind me, his usually perfect hair disheveled from our chase through the city. His button-down shirt was wrinkled and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that made him look younger, more vulnerable, more like the Blake I'd fallen in love with during our first awkward coffee date. But his eyes gave him away. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the subway platform, I could see the guilt written across every feature. The knowledge that he'd been caught, that his carefully constructed double life had finally collapsed. "Don't," I said, my voice barely audible over the approaching train. "Don't call me that, Kai. What you saw back there, what I saw," I interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, was my boyfriend holding hands with his ex-lover and looking happier than he's looked in months. "What I saw was you remembering what it feels like to be with someone you actually chose instead of someone you settled for." Blake's face crumpled like I'd physically struck him. "That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out as a bitter laugh. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you being honest with me from the beginning about still being in love with Damon. Fair would have been you not making me fall for you when your heart was already taken." The train pulled into the station with a rush of hot air and metal on metal screaming. The doors slid open and passengers began streaming out while others pushed forward to board. This was my chance, my escape route. All I had to do was step through those doors and let them carry me away from this nightmare. But I found myself frozen, staring into Blake's blue eyes and seeing my entire future rewriting itself in real time. 2 years of shared meals and inside jokes and quiet Sunday mornings. 2 years of believing I'd found my person, my home, my happily ever after. All of it crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "I never meant for this to happen," Blake said, and I could hear the tears in his voice even over the chaos of the subway platform. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I replied simply. "You hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible." The train doors started to close, and I made my decision. Not the decision to run, but the decision to stay, because running away wouldn't change what I'd seen, wouldn't erase the image of Blake looking at Damon like he was the answer to every prayer Blake had ever whispered. I stepped back from the train just as the doors sealed shut, trapping us together on the platform with 100 strangers who couldn't care less about our drama. But somehow, being surrounded by all these people made the conversation feel safer, like their presence was a buffer against the possibility of complete emotional destruction. "So what happens now?" I asked, 'cause someone had to be the adult in this situation. Blake looked around the platform like he was seeing it for the first time, taking in the fluorescent lights and graffiti-covered walls and the general urban decay that surrounded us. This wasn't exactly the romantic setting either of us had imagined for this conversation. "Now we talk," he said finally. "Really talk. About everything." I nodded, even though talking was the last thing I wanted to do. Talking meant facing the truth. Talking meant admitting that our relationship had been built on a foundation of lies and half-truths and desperate hope. But maybe it was time to stop running from reality. Maybe it was time to have the conversation we should have had months ago, when Blake first started saying Damon's name in his sleep. The next train arrived within minutes, less crowded than the first. Without discussing it, we both stepped aboard, finding seats near the back where we could talk without being overheard. The familiar rocking motion of the subway car felt oddly soothing, like being rocked in a cradle while your world fell apart. Blake sat across from me, close enough that our knees almost touched, but it might as well have been an ocean between us. He kept opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closing it again, as if he couldn't find the right words to explain away what I'd witnessed. "How long has he been back?" I asked, because someone had to start this conversation, and clearly it wasn't going to be him. Blake's shoulders sagged like the weight of the secret was finally too much to carry. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days of Blake acting strange, distant, distracted. 14 days of me asking if everything was okay and being told not to worry about it. 14 days of lies. "He called me out of nowhere," Blake continued, his voice barely audible over the train's rumble. "Said he was moving back to the city, that he'd made a mistake leaving. I didn't know what to say." "So you said nothing to me?" "I didn't want to hurt you with something that might not even matter." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Something that might not matter? Blake, I saw the way you looked at him. That wasn't nostalgia or curiosity. That was love. Real, deep, soul-crushing love. Blake flinched like I'd slapped him. It's complicated. No, it's really not. I leaned forward, forcing him to meet my eyes. You love him. You've always loved him. I was just keeping your bed warm until he came back. That's not true, isn't it? I interrupted. Blake, you talk about him in your sleep. You have his picture hidden in your old college textbooks. You get this look on your face whenever someone mentions California. Like you're remembering something beautiful and painful at the same time. Did you really think I didn't notice? The train pulled into the next station and a few passengers got off while others climbed aboard. A mother with twin toddlers settled into the seats across the aisle, and I had to lower my voice to avoid creating a scene. I tried to get over him, Blake said quietly. When I met you, I thought maybe I could finally move on. You were so different from Damon. Steady, reliable, safe. I thought maybe safe was what I needed. Safe. There it was. The word I'd been dreading. I wasn't Blake's grand passion or his soulmate or his happily ever after. I was safe. I was the sensible choice. The practical option. The human equivalent of a savings account. How long were you together? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. 3 years. We met freshman year of college. Started dating sophomore year. I thought we'd get married after graduation, but then he got that job offer in Los Angeles. Blake's voice took on a dreamy quality, like he was remembering sunshine and first love and all the possibilities that used to seem infinite. I begged him to stay, told him we could make it work, that love was more important than career opportunities. But he was ambitious, driven. He said we were too young to tie ourselves down. And now he's back. And now he's back, Blake confirmed. Older, more mature. He says he's ready to settle down. That he knows what he wants now. And what he wants is you. Blake nodded miserably. He says the job in LA was everything he thought he wanted, but he was miserable the entire time. Says he realized that success doesn't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with. I felt like I was watching a romantic movie where I was somehow cast as the villain. The obstacle standing between two soulmates and their destined reunion. The problem was, I didn't want to be noble about it. I didn't want to step aside gracefully and wish them well. I wanted to fight for what was mine. Even if I was starting to realize it had never really been mine to begin with. So what did you tell him? I asked. Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the tunnel walls rushing past. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft I had to strain to hear him. I told him I needed time to think. That my life is complicated now. Complicated. I repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Is that what I am to you? A complication? No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Blake? Because from where I'm sitting it sounds like you're trying to figure out how to dump your current boyfriend without looking like a complete asshole. The mother with the twins shot us a sharp look, and I realized my voice had gotten louder. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down, but the anger was bubbling up inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I love you, Blake said suddenly, desperately. Kai, I do love you. These 2 years with you have been incredible. You make me laugh, you make me feel grounded, you make me like I can handle anything life throws at us. But, because there was definitely a but coming, Blake's eyes filled with tears. But when I saw Damon today, when I looked into his eyes again for the first time in 3 years, I remembered what it felt like to be completely, helplessly, irrationally in love with someone. The kind of love that makes you stupid and reckless and willing to burn down your entire life just to be with them. And there it was. The truth I'd been trying to avoid for months. Blake loved me. But he was in love with Damon. I was the comfortable choice. The mature decision. The person he could build a stable life with. But Damon was the person who made his heart race and his palms sweat and his rational mind shut down completely. I'd never stood a chance. The train pulled into my stop, and I stood up abruptly. This is me. Blake looked confused. But we're not done talking. Yes, we are. I looked down at him, this beautiful, complicated man who'd just torn my heart out with his honesty. Blake, I can't compete with a ghost. I can't compete with your first love. Your great what if. Your road not taken. And I shouldn't have to. Kai, please. But I was already walking toward the doors, pushing through the small crowd of passengers waiting to exit. As the train slowed to a stop, I turned back to look at Blake one more time. "When you figure out what you really want," I said, "you know where to find me. But I won't wait forever." The doors slid open, and I stepped onto the platform without looking back. Behind me, I heard Blake calling my name, but I kept walking toward the exit stairs. I'd spent enough time in the dark, riding trains to nowhere and having conversations that only led to more heartbreak. It was time to come back up to the surface and figure out how to breathe again. The elevator to our apartment building felt like a coffin, carrying me up 6 floors to face the remnants of a life I'd built with someone who was never really mine. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, and for a moment I considered just sitting in the hallway until Blake came home. But that felt too pathetic, even for me. Instead, I climbed 2 more flights to the roof. Our roof, the place where Blake first told me he loved me 9 months ago. Under a canopy of city lights and stars that seemed to shine just for us. Where we'd spent countless evenings planning our future, talking about getting a dog, maybe moving to a bigger apartment, possibly even getting married someday. All those dreams felt like someone else's memories now. I sat on the ledge with my legs dangling over the side, watching the traffic crawl through the streets below like tiny ants following predetermined paths. At least they knew where they were going. I felt completely lost, suspended between the life I thought I had and the uncertain future stretching out ahead of me. The city sprawled in every direction, millions of lights representing millions of lives I'd never intersect with. Somewhere down there, people were falling in love for the first time. Somewhere else, other hearts were breaking just like mine. The thought should have been comforting, this reminder that I wasn't alone in my pain, but it just made me feel smaller somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Where are you? We need to finish talking." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. What was left to say? He'd been brutally honest on the train, more honest than I'd expected or wanted. He loved me, but he was in love with Damon. Case closed. Conversation over. Heart officially shattered. The roof access door creaked open about 20 minutes later, and I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Blake's footsteps were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat by now. He approached slowly, cautiously, like I was a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movements. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, settling down beside me on the ledge. "When you weren't in the apartment, I thought maybe you'd..." "What? Thrown myself off a building because my boyfriend is in love with someone else?" I kept my voice deliberately light, but I could hear the bitterness creeping in around the edges. "Give me some credit, Blake. I'm heartbroken, not suicidal." "Don't joke about that." His voice was sharp with genuine fear. "Please don't sit so close to the edge." "Why? Do you actually care what happens to me, or are you just worried about having my death on your conscience?" Blake flinched like I'd physically struck him. "Of course I care. Kai, you matter to me more than you know." "More than Damon?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, and we both knew the answer before he even opened his mouth. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. In the distance, sirens wailed through the night, and I wondered if that's what heartbreak sounded like to the outside world. Just another emergency in a city full of them. "It's not that simple," Blake said finally. "Actually, it is that simple." I turned to look at him properly for the first time since he'd arrived. The city lights cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired. "You love him more than you love me. You always have. I was just too blind to see it." "That's not true, isn't it?" I interrupted. "Blake, I've spent 2 years watching you love me carefully, thoughtfully, like you were following a recipe for the perfect relationship. But today, when you looked at Damon, that was different. That was wild and reckless, and completely out of control. That was real love." Blake's shoulders sagged under the weight of my words. "Damon was my everything once. My first kiss, my first love, my first heartbreak. When he left for California, I thought the world had ended. I was a mess for months. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't imagine a future without him in it. And then you met me. And then I met you," he confirmed. "You saved me, Kai. You pulled me out of that darkness and taught me how to be happy again. You showed me that love didn't have to be this devastating, all-consuming thing that left you feeling like you were drowning. Love could be peaceful, stable, safe. There was that word again. Safe. I was starting to hate it more than any curse word in the English language. But today, when Damon walked back into your life, you remembered what it felt like to drown. I said. It wasn't a question. Blake nodded miserably. He looked exactly the same but different somehow. More confident, more sure of himself. He told me about his life in Los Angeles, about the success he'd found, the money he'd made, but he also told me about the loneliness, about going to bed every night wishing he'd chosen differently. And now he wants you back. He says he's ready now. Ready to prioritize love over ambition. Ready to build a life with someone instead of just building a career. Blake's voice took on that dreamy quality again, the one that meant he was remembering something beautiful. He bought a house here, Kai, a real house with a yard and a garage. He's not planning to leave again. Each detail felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. Damon hadn't just come back, he'd come back with a plan. He'd learned from his mistakes, grown up, become the man Blake needed him to be 3 years ago. How was I supposed to compete with that kind of romantic grand gesture? So what did you tell him when he laid out this perfect life he's offering you? Blake was quiet for so long I wasn't sure he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I told him I needed time to think. That my life is more complicated now than it was 3 years ago. He turned to look at me and I could see tears glittering in his eyes. But Kai, if I'm being completely honest with you and with myself, when he asked me to give us another chance, every cell in my body wanted to say yes immediately. The admission hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I'd asked for honesty and Blake was giving it to me in brutal, devastating detail. But knowing the truth and being able to handle it were two very different things. Why didn't you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Because I made promises to you. Because we've built something real together. Even if it's different from what Damon and I had. Because walking away from 2 years of love, even comfortable love, felt like the kind of mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life. I stood up from the ledge, suddenly needing distance between us. The conversation was becoming too intimate, too raw. Like we were performing surgery on our relationship without anesthesia. Blake, I can't be your consolation prize, I said, pacing to the other side of the roof. I can't be the person you choose because it's the responsible thing to do. That's not fair to either of us. You're not my consolation prize. Then what am I? I spun around to face him and the force of my movement made him flinch. Because right now, I feel like the runner-up in a competition I didn't even know I was entered in. Like I've been auditioning for the role of your boyfriend for 2 years while you were waiting for the real star to return. Blake stood up too, reaching for me, but I stepped away before he could make contact. Don't touch me, I said. Not until you figure out what you actually want. Not until you decide if I'm worth choosing for the right reasons. Kai, please. We can work through this. Can we? I laughed, but it came out hollow and bitter. Blake, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone in my entire life. More than I thought it was possible to love another human being. But I won't compete with a ghost anymore. I won't spend the rest of our relationship wondering if you're thinking about him when you kiss me, if you're wishing I was someone else when we make love. His face crumpled completely, and for a moment I wanted to take it all back, to fall into his arms and pretend that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. But I'd been pretending for too long already, and I was exhausted from the effort. So what happens now? He asked, his voice breaking on the last word. I looked out at the city one more time. At all those lights representing possibilities I'd never explore, dreams I'd never pursue. Somewhere down there, Damon was probably waiting for Blake's decision, confident in his ability to win back his first love. Somewhere down there was the future I'd thought Blake and I would build together. Now you go home, I said quietly. You think about what your heart actually wants, not what your head thinks is right. And tomorrow morning, you make a choice, him or me. But Blake, if you choose me, it has to be because you can't imagine your life without me in it, not because you think it's the safe option. And if I choose wrong, then we both learn to live with the consequences of our choices. But at least we'll know where we stand. Blake left the roof without another word, and I stayed up there for hours afterward, watching the city slowly quiet down as midnight approached. The traffic thinned out, the lights in office buildings went dark one by one, and eventually even the sirens faded to an occasional distant wail. By the time I finally went back to our apartment, Blake was in bed with his back turned toward my side, his breathing deep and even. Either he was actually asleep or he was doing a convincing job of pretending. Either way, I was grateful not to have to continue our conversation in the intimate darkness of our bedroom. I grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet and settled onto the couch in our living room. Everything around me held memories of our life together. The coffee table we'd assembled badly on our third date, arguing over the incomprehensible IKEA instructions, until we were both laughing too hard to be frustrated. The framed photo from our trip to the mountains last summer, both of us sunburned and grinning beside a waterfall. The throw pillows Blake had insisted on buying because they brought the whole room together, even though they cost more than my monthly grocery budget. 2 years of shared moments, small decisions, compromises that had seemed so important at the time. Now they felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Blake's face in that cafe, lit up with a joy I'd never been able to inspire. I replayed our rooftop conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every pause, every expression, looking for hidden meanings, secret messages, some indication of what choice he might make in the morning. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement from the bedroom, footsteps padding to the bathroom, then the kitchen, then stopping outside the living room where I was lying rigid on the couch, pretending to be asleep. "Kai?" Blake's voice was soft and certain. "Are you awake?" I didn't answer, partly because I wasn't ready for another emotionally devastating conversation, but mostly because I was afraid of what he might tell me if I did respond. Maybe he'd already made his decision. Maybe seeing me curled up alone on our couch had crystallized something for him, one way or another. After a few minutes, he went back to bed, but I could hear him tossing and turning through the thin walls. At least I wasn't the only one suffering through this endless night. When dawn finally started creeping through our living room windows, I gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee, strong coffee, because I had a feeling I was going to need all the caffeine I could get to survive whatever conversation was coming. Blake emerged from the bedroom around 7, looking as exhausted as I felt. His hair was sticking up in every direction, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older, more fragile. He was wearing the old college t-shirt he'd had since before we met, soft from years of washing, and for a moment he looked so young and lost that I wanted to comfort him. But then I remembered why we were both awake at dawn, looking like we'd survived a natural disaster, and the urge passed. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, accepting the mug of coffee I offered him. I shook my head. Too much thinking. We stood in our kitchen, the space that had witnessed countless morning conversations about work and weekend plans and what to have for dinner. Now it felt like a courtroom where we were both waiting for the judge to deliver a verdict that would change everything. "Kai, I need to tell you something," Blake said, and my stomach dropped to somewhere around my ankles. Here it comes, I thought. He's chosen Damon. He's going to let me down easy. Tell me how much our time together meant to him. Maybe offer to help me find a new apartment. He's going to be kind and gentle and apologetic while he destroys my entire world. Last night after our talk on the roof, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About choosing you for the right reasons. About not settling for safe when I could have extraordinary. He set his coffee mug down on the counter and looked directly into my eyes. So I called Damon. My heart stopped beating. Actually stopped. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Could feel my knees threatening to buckle under the weight of impending devastation. I told him that I needed to be completely honest with him about my feelings. About where my head and heart have been since he came back. Blake's voice was steady, determined. Like he'd rehearsed this speech. I told him that seeing him again brought back all those old feelings. All that passion and intensity that nearly destroyed me when he left. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to keep myself upright. This was it. This was Blake choosing his first love, his real love, over the comfortable relationship we'd built together. I should have prepared myself better for this moment. Should have had some dignity ready to deploy when he finally said the words that would end us. But I also told him, Blake continued, that loving someone isn't just about passion and intensity. It's about choosing them every day, even when it's hard. It's about building something together that's stronger than the sum of its parts. Wait. What? I told him that what you and I have might not be the wild, reckless love of two teenagers, but it's real and it's solid, and it's ours. I told him that you've seen me at my worst and chosen to stay, that you've supported my dreams even when they didn't align with yours, that you've made me a better person without trying to change who I fundamentally am. I stared at Blake, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe, afraid to interpret his words the way my heart desperately wanted to. I told Damon that I loved him once, and part of me probably always will, but I'm in love with you, Kai. Present tense. Active choice. Every single day. The words hit me like a tidal wave, knocking me off balance in the best possible way. I'd been so prepared for rejection that accepting hope felt almost impossible. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because Blake, if you're just choosing me because it's easier, because it requires less change to your life, I'd rather you be honest about that now. Blake stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his familiar scent, could see the sincerity written across every feature of his face. I'm choosing you because when I imagined my life without you in it, I couldn't breathe. Because when I thought about waking up next to someone else, even someone I used to love desperately, it felt wrong. Because you're not my safe choice, Kai. You're my right choice. Blake reached for my hands, and this time I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm and slightly trembling, and I realized he'd been just as scared as I was about how this conversation might go. But we need to talk about some things, he said. Really talk without running away or hiding behind politeness or fear of hurting each other's feelings. I nodded, not trusting my voice quite yet. The relief of not being rejected was so overwhelming that I felt dizzy. But Blake was right. We couldn't just pretend the last 24 hours hadn't happened. We couldn't go back to our comfortable routine without addressing the cracks that had been exposed in our foundation. I haven't been fair to you, Blake continued. I've been carrying around all this unresolved stuff about Damon, and instead of dealing with it properly, I let it create distance between us. I let it make me take you for granted. Why didn't you ever tell me about him? Really tell me, I mean. Not just the sanitized version about an ex from college. Blake sighed, leading me over to our couch, where we settled down facing each other. Because I was ashamed that I wasn't completely over my ex when we started dating. Ashamed that sometimes, when I was happy with you, I still missed him. It felt like a betrayal of what we were building together. But keeping it secret was worse. I pointed out. It made me feel like I was competing with someone I couldn't even see clearly. You're right. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself. I was afraid that if you knew how much Damon had meant to me, you'd realize you deserved someone who could love you with their whole heart. Uncomplicated and complete. I considered this, turning his words over in my mind. Blake, I never expected to be your first love. I never expected our relationship to be simple or uncomplicated. I just wanted to be your choice. Your real, conscious, deliberate choice. You are, he said firmly. Kai, these past 2 years haven't been me settling for second best. They've been me growing up, learning what adult love actually looks like. What Damon and I had was beautiful and intense and completely unsustainable. What you and I have, safe? I suggested with a wry smile. Blake laughed. The first genuine laughter I'd heard from him since this whole mess started. I was going to say sustainable, but also passionate in its own way. Passionate about building something lasting, about choosing each other every day, about creating a life together that's bigger than either of us could manage alone. So what did Damon say when you told him all this? Blake's expression grew more serious. He was hurt, obviously, but he also said he understood. He told me that he'd spent 3 years idealizing what we used to have, forgetting about all the reasons it didn't work the first time. The jealousy, the drama, the way we brought out each other's worst impulses as often as our best ones. Do you think you'll stay friends? I don't know, maybe eventually. Right now, I think we both need some distance to process everything. Blake squeezed my hands. But Kai, I need you to know that this conversation with Damon wasn't about choosing between two equal options. It was about me finally being honest with myself about what I actually want my life to look like. And what do you want it to look like? Blake smiled. And this time it reached his eyes in a way that I'd missed more than I'd realized. I want Sunday morning pancakes at that place on 5th Street. I want to argue about what to watch on Netflix and always end up letting you pick. I want to plan trips we'll probably never take and adopt that dog we keep talking about. I want to grow old with someone who makes me laugh and challenges me to be better and doesn't mind that I'm not perfect. That's very specific, I said, but I was smiling too now. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Blake leaned forward until our foreheads were almost touching. Kai, I love you. Not because you're easy or convenient or safe. I love you because you're kind and funny and brilliant and sexy and you make me want to be the best version of myself. I love you because when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it. I love you too, I said, and the words felt different now. Cleaner somehow, like they'd been washed free of doubt and insecurity. Even when you're an idiot who doesn't know how to tuka properly. Especially then, Blake agreed. We sat in our living room as the morning sun streamed through our windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations. We had a lot of work ahead of us. Trust to rebuild, communication patterns to establish, conversations to have about expectations and boundaries and how to handle future challenges without running away from each other. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like we were truly partners in that work. Not just two people who happened to be dating, but a team committed to building something worthwhile together. So what happens now? I asked. Blake grinned, and I was struck by how much younger he looked when he wasn't carrying the weight of unspoken secrets. Now we make pancakes. And then we go adopt that dog we've been talking about. And then we start figuring out what the rest of our lives are going to look like. All in one day? We've got a lot of lost time to make up for. I leaned in and kissed him, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through uncertain territory. His lips were soft and familiar, but there was something new in the way he kissed me back. Something that felt like a promise, a commitment, a choice made with his whole heart instead of just the careful, rational part of it. When we finally broke apart, Blake rested his forehead against mine. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For fighting for us. For not letting me get away with taking you for granted. For making me choose you properly instead of just drifting along in comfortable complacency. Thank you for choosing me, I replied. For real this time. Every day, Blake promised. For as long as you'll have me. Outside our window, the city was waking up. People heading to work, starting their days, making their own choices about love and life and what mattered most to them. Somewhere out there, Damon was probably nursing his own broken heart, maybe wondering if he'd made a mistake coming back. Somewhere else, two strangers were falling in love for the first time, convinced they'd found their soulmates. But in our living room, Blake and I were choosing each other with full knowledge of what that choice meant. Not because it was easy or inevitable or written in the stars, but because it was right, because what we'd built together was worth fighting for, worth nurturing, worth the daily effort of conscious love. And for the first time since I'd walked into that cafe and seen my boyfriend holding hands with his first love, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. I felt like everything was going to be exactly as it should be.